Clerk. Private member's business, notice number 7 relating to crime in Victoria.
I call the honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I move the motion relating to crime in Victoria in the terms to which it appears on the notice paper. And Deputy Speaker, I have to say I move this motion with great disappointment because it reflects a problem now faced by the great state of Victoria, where crime has become an endemic part of our culture in a way that we have not known before. In fact, only when this motion was originally presented to the chamber, the Victorian Crime Statistics Agency showed the total number of offences reached 535,826 during the past financial year, which was an increase of 13.4%. I don't have them privy with me right now, but I do know that only last week new data was released which showed that crime had continued to rise in the great state of Victoria. And particularly the nature of the crime is shifting. As members may be aware, there was recently a terrorist incident within my electorate. And I think that brought home for everybody not just that there are problems of crime, but the violent nature of the crime, where we're seeing home invasions, people attacked, carjackings, as well as terrorist incidents and deaths. So tragically, in fact, we've seen assaults have increased 11%, robberies increased 14%, and aggravated burglaries have increased by 7% in Victoria. And I'm not alarmist on these issues. One of the great things about living in this country is that we've had traditionally low rates of crime. But what we are seeing is a relatively rapid increase in the rate of crime, and it's having a human effect. I talk often to constituents who are concerned about the rate of crime now within my community or neighbouring communities, and how much it has an impact on their sense of safety, particularly for older Australians. Older Australians who, from a first position, have always lived in a relatively crime-free society, but in addition to that are increasingly fearful of leaving their homes or being exposed to the risks of what happens when they confront somebody who wants to break into their home or may do something like break into their car. And surely I would have thought that all members, regardless of your views and political persuasions, would accept the principal obligation of every government is to protect citizens from undue harm. And the crime wave that has swept across the great state of Victoria continues to cause angst and fear for that harm. And we have been forced to confront the idea that our communities are no longer safe and harmonious. We have now exceeded 500,000 offences during the past financial year, as I read out before. And only a couple of weeks ago, we had a tragic death in my electorate, as I said, of Kai Ho, who was murdered by a man who should never have been walking our streets. And this is the reality that a lot of people are asking, including the Prime Minister and his leadership after this incident, is why this man was on bail and whether there is now a crisis around bail. And I know COAG has now acted to reform the bail crisis that isn't just in Victoria but across the country. But particularly, I think we have to look very clearly at the role of the current state government, led by Daniel Andrews, who has actually been far too dismissive of these risks and the impact it has on community safety as well as the justice system. Now, I'm not going to try and pretend there are easy answers. Having proper engagement programs to ensure that young Australians have pathways for constructive involvement with their community is very important. As the saying goes, Deputy Speaker, idle hands do the devil's work. And that is why we have to make sure that we do have the social and support infrastructure in place to make sure that we don't have people committing crimes. But it is also hard to ignore the problems with sentencing, bail laws and the watered-down and closed police stations that we now have. And the Premier has promised to tackle the violent youth gangs who have consistently terrorised Victorians, but it clearly hasn't made the progress that I'm sure even he concedes he would like to have achieved. And as I said, I've had examples just outside of my electorate of carjackings, and on far too many examples now occurring, and in fact one only relatively recently within my electorate as well. There's clearly a need for bail law reform, and I recognise the leadership of the Prime Minister, but also of COAG, in bringing that about at their recent meeting. But we need more leadership at the state government level, and this is what I hear from my constituents. And just to quote Jonathan, who lives in my electorate, he wrote three separate letters addressed to Victorian Minister for Police, and wrote, quote, "This is not the Melbourne I grew up in. It seems that having home invasions and carjackings are now the norm, and we are expected to accept it. Mr. Speaker, or Deputy Speaker, this is not a reality that I will accept, and neither should any other Victorian Member of Parliament. And the tragedy of this is Jonathan has written these letters and the state government and the ministers have not even bothered to reply.